Thank you for doing this, Devasher.
Thank you for calling me.
So, I want to start with, you write in your book that you developed an interest in Pakistan quite early as due to some stories your father told you about two Pakistani Air Force officers. So maybe we could touch upon that while we start.
Yeah, when I was growing up, and especially during the 65 war, my father was in a sensitive place, location. So he used to tell us stories about two Pakistani Air Force officers who had been his flight commanders during the Second World War in the Royal Indian Air Force, and flying Spitfires and Hurricanes over Burma and after the war also. And these two officers later on went to head the Pakistan Air Force, Air Marshal Sagar Khan and Air Marshal Noor Khan. And during the 65 war, Air Marshal Noor Khan was heading the Pakistan Air Force. So he would tell us stories about him and their time in Burma together and things like that. So my interest started there. Then the war of 71, and in college and in university I studied the freedom struggle, the partition of India, and my curiosity grew even more. And so gradually I became interested in Pakistan, So that's how my interest really started. Then during my service career I had an opportunity to study Pakistan much more closely.
So I'm curious, what was the relationship like between, let's say, your father and these Pakistani officers when they were serving together in the RAF? Did they see each other as part of a same, I suppose, did they share a common identity?
Yeah, they were very close. My father would tell me that they were very close, because at that time when they joined the Air Force, there was no talk of partition. This communal frenzy was also not there. And in the services, there was separate kind of an ethos, which is very different to what is there in the civilian areas. So they were very close.
So I suppose when the movement for Pakistan started, were they these two officers, I suppose, were they sympathetic to it from the beginning, or were they?
No, I think for, like in the case of most army officers, the decision came whether to stay in India or to stay in Pakistan. That was the time when they made a decision. But till up to that time in decision, there was nothing, no communal problems within the armed forces, and there never has been actually.
And I believe they, I'm just assuming, they weren't that religious, I suppose, were they?
I don't know, my father never touched upon that aspect, but I suspect they weren't. They were not. Yeah.
So let's start with we are recording this interview quite close to Pakistan's Independence Day. So let's start.
Pakistan's creation. You see, people in India make a mistake saying Pakistan's Independence Day because Pakistan didn't become independent. It was created on 14th August 1947.
So you trace the roots of the Pakistan movement to Syed Ahmed Khan and this feeling of insecurity amongst the Muslim community as a result of the decline of the Mughal Empire. So could you touch upon that and expand a bit on that?
This is a feeling of insecurity that arose among a section of the Muslim elite in the North India, especially in the United Provinces and Bihar, that because they had lost power, they had lost patronage due to the long decline of the Mughal Empire and the prominence of the British and of the Marathas and other Hindu kings. So they felt a feeling of insecurity that what will happen to them. They were rulers for so long. So this feeling of insecurity was then gradually translated over a period of time, especially with the feeling that with representative government, one man, one vote, they will be totally outvoted by the Hindus, the majority Hindus. Syed Ahmed Khan said that one person has 4 dice and the other person only has 1. So where does the one person? And Jinnah said the same thing when Gandhiji said we are brothers. He said, but brother Gandhi has 3 dice and I have only 1. So this feeling of insecurity arose section of the Muslim elite. They felt that they will be out of power and patronage, and now they will be dominated by the Hindus.
So these Muslim elite, did most of them stay in India after the partition, or did a significant amount of them move there?
You see, the two-nation theory, this movement for creation of Pakistan, was largely from the Muslim elite in north of India, UP. Jinnah, Liaquat Ali, a lot of other people migrated. A lot of them also stayed on, but a lot of them migrated. So they were the ones who actually went and led the Pakistan movement. In fact, so much so that the Muhajirs, as they came to be called, those who went to and settled in Karachi and Hyderabad, they were the ones who had led the movement for creation of Pakistan, and they gave themselves the moniker of Muhajirs.
Muhajirs.
You know, so they are the ones who migrated from India.
Like I believe there was, you mentioned in the book, like in Sindh, a lot of them settled, especially in the urban areas, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah. So about 18%, 1 million of them, bulk of the people who went from Punjab stayed on in Punjab, you know, in the Pakistani Punjab. But a lot of the people from other parts of India, they were made to settle in Sindh, in Karachi and in Hyderabad. So because they were in such large numbers, they developed an identity of their own. And they started calling themselves a nationality, a Muhajir nationality.
And they, I suppose, phenomenologically in their own head, they saw themselves as the leading force behind Pakistan.
Absolutely. Therefore, the alienation later on. You see, in the 70s, when Bhutto came and became Prime Minister, he promoted the Sindhis. Till the 70s, the Muhajirs dominated. Whether it was a bureaucracy, whether it was in getting lands and other benefits from the state. When Bhutto came into power, he started promoting Sindhis. He promoted the Sindhi language. He promoted them in jobs. Then they started feeling a sense of alienation. That, look, we sacrificed everything in India. We gave up. We were the ones who created, and yet now we are being treated as second-class citizens. That's where Muhajir alienation started, and it led in 1986 to the formation of the Muhajir Qawmi movement. Then under Altaf Hussain, a new party was set up.
I read the book quite some time ago, but you attribute three aspects to the creation of Pakistan. One is, of course, Syed Ahmed Khan and the Muslim elite of India, undivided India at that time. The second is policies of the Brits. And the third is Congress, I suppose you say. So, what role did the Brits play in it, and what was in it for them?
You see, for them, the security of their possessions in India, you know, it's called the jewel and the crown, that was paramount. Initially, the Congress had been set up by A.O. Hume that it will be a debating club and steam will be let off, you know, they can talk and discuss issues. But then they found in very short time that Muslims were also gravitating towards the Congress. So they said, you know, this is something that we need to be careful about. So they did three things. One was the partition of Bengal in 1905, if you remember, that, you know, created a rift. Then 1906, the All India Muslim League was set up in Dhaka. You know, large sums of money were also paid to set them up so that the Muslims can have their own party. And 1909, the Maulay Minto reform, they set up separate electorates. That is, Muslims and Hindus will have separate electorates. So by these three major moves, they escalated the differences between, the cultural differences between Hindus and Muslims onto the political and constitutional plane. And the story of Muslim separatism, Muslim League separatism starts from there. Because they developed a separate consciousness politically at the constitutional level. So that was the role of the British. At every stage, when Congress would ask for more, they would prop up the Muslim League who would oppose whatever the Congress wanted.
You quote here Lord Canning, I believe, the first Viceroy of India, and he writes a letter to the board of East India Company, I believe. This is quite, like, I've always, as a child, obviously heard about, you know, divide and rule policy and all that. But it's quite striking to see that in, like, black and white.
Yeah, absolutely black and white. He said if they were to unite, they would show us a door. You know, and Churchill, I think, also said the same thing. So we have to ensure that they don't come together at the political and constitutional level. So they kept inciting and, you know, propping up. And they made sure that the Muslim League became the representative body of the Muslims. There were other political parties of the Muslims also. They sidelined them. And they had identified Jinnah as the key man. And they made sure that he became the sole spokesman of the Muslim League. In fact, there was a very interesting incident in the Simla conference in the 1940s, where Khan Sahab, who was the Chief Minister of NWFP,
Frontier Province,
Northwest Frontier Province, he told the Governor General, what was his name? He told the Governor General, look, I am the Chief Minister of the largest Muslim province in India. And I am not part of the Muslims, so what do you have to say to me? I mean, how come you are giving everything to Jinnah? And he had no reply. At least his reply is not recorded. So, but they made sure that everybody had to come through Jinnah, and they made him the sole spokesman and the Muslim League is the sole party for the Muslims of India.
You quote in one place in your book another scholar, and you mention how many Brits were there in India during the Raj, so to say, and very few, like there were not that many people, like
60,000 or something like that, yeah.
And I can't remember, like in one of the Churchill's biographies, might be the one by Andrew Gilbert, Churchill is living in Bangalore or something, I believe. This is long before he became Prime Minister.
So he had come here, he was recruited as one of the British regiments, and then he was sent to Malakand as a journalist. He was an embedded journalist, and he wrote his book.
Yeah. So during that time, he writes a letter to his brother, and he says this thing that, we should be quite proud as Brits that so few of us are ruling over such a large nation. So what do you think, like what made it possible for the Brits, I suppose?
One word, disunity. In India was divided into various princes, divided amongst various provinces, and they could not unite. So 1857 was a wake-up call for the Brits, because they realized that if the Hindus and Muslims were to get together and fight unitedly, the British didn't stand a chance. They wouldn't stand a chance at all. So they have to keep them separate. That's why these policies were adopted to make sure that Hindus and Muslims could never unite. But the reasons why they were able to rule is because we were disunited.
Could you get more deeply about the 1857 uprising, that's the Brits call it, and then the, I suppose, reaction of the Brits that we need to educate the Muslims because you cite these figures in the book, the disparity.
Yeah. So there was, when Macaulay's famous minute, when he says that we have to create a class of people who will be Indian, but in their attitudes and things will be like British. But whereas the Hindus had taken to education in a big way right from the beginning, the Muslims had not. So there was a Hunter Commission had been set up by Lord Mayo, I think it was, that are the Muslims destined to oppose the Queen? What is it that we can do that will make them loyal to the Queen? So he gave a series of recommendations. He travelled around and gave a report that how is it that we can bring the Muslims into the mainstream and make them loyal to the Queen. And then he talks about education, how they needed reservation, they needed to be brought up. And that's where Syed Ahmed's role comes in. He realized that this was important, so then he set up the Aligarh Muslim College. Anglo, initially it was a different name, then it became the Aligarh Muslim University, to give education to the Muslim elites so that they could also take part in the process of development and in politics in British India.
So
that was a major impact of 1857. And of course, from East India Company it was transferred to the Crown.
I believe there was some opposition, I believe a significant amount of opposition from the Orthodox Muslim community. Like they didn't want to get westernized, I suppose.
Yeah.
So eventually what role did they end up playing in Pakistan's creation? And like how did they, because initially it seemed that they opposed it because it wasn't Muslim enough. So in the end,
there
what
was,
they
like the Jamaat Ulema, Hind, JUI, there was Jamaat Islami and all that. So they were initially opposed. Maududi, for example, was saying that, first of all, they were opposed to Jinnah, that is a westernized person who's not even really a true Muslim, he is leading this. But the people from the AMU, they were in the forefront of creating a separate thing. So the Orthodox people opposed it and even passed resolutions against it. So, they adopted a nationalistic posture. Maududi, for example, who was from the Jamaat Islami, he was opposed to thin nail. That why are we giving up this and going? Later on, of course, when he went to Pakistan, he became a big votary of Pakistan and a big supporter of Pakistan. So there was this difference between the Western educated who were coming up, AMU, and the traditional religious ulema.
Does this still play out in Pakistan, I suppose, like a military, like people in the military, I suppose, who are more westernized, so to say, and people who are a bit more conservative?
Since Zia's time, there has been a lot of Islamization in the Pakistan army itself. So I'm not so sure. There was a time when there was this, what's called the US generation, people who had trained in the United States. But after Zia's time, what called Zia Bharati, these people have become far more traditional, far more religiously conservative. The Tablighi Jamaat has played a big influence in the Pakistan army. In cantonment now you'll find everybody has a beard. You know, when Zia's time this was considered one of the avenues for promotion, that everybody kept a beard and everybody prayed 5 times a day, and they became far more religious. So in fact there was a fear at time in the West, especially that is the Pakistan army becoming too radicalized? That can there be a radical coup against the leadership and it will become a totally Islamized army. So there is no difference today, I think, between the westernized and because bulk of the army itself is very religiously inclined. In fact, the army considers itself not only as the protectors of Pakistan's territorial integrity, but also what is called Nazariya-e-Pakistan or ideology of Pakistan, which is basically Islam plus Kashmir. You know, that is the Nazariya-Pakistan.
This is just anecdotal, so evidence, but I don't know, like obviously, what it suggests. But I remember during my time as an undergrad student at UK, there was significant amount of students, you know, from not British Pakistanis, but Pakistani students whose, you know, father and all were in the military. And you cite in the book this sort of, like the state of education in Pakistan, I suppose, how poor it is. Just let me know what you think of this. It seems like they are quite comfortable sending their old children to, you know, all these Western places, but they don't want, let's say, the poor man to get educated in the correct way. Does that, like, in any way make sense?
You see, in Pakistan there are 3 streams of education. There are the madrasas, you know, the poor people go to madrasas, learn basically about religion, about the Quran. Then there are the government schools. About 65 to 70% of the children go to government schools, those who are in school. And then you have the private schools, and the army has its own schools. So the madrasas and the government schools, the emphasis is lot, especially after Zia's time, on an Islamized education. In fact, Zia had laid down what should be the objective of education, and it was a Islamized education. So children who are coming out of government schools, and there have been studies of Pakistani textbooks, you know, by the STPI, Sustainable Policy Development Institute of Islamabad, which show that, you know, children coming out of government schools are even more jihadi and radical than what are children from madrasas, because of what is taught to them. You know, this whole thing of jihad and shahadat, this thing that Hindus, Jews and Christians are your enemies, the otherizing of, you know, different, and the Pakistanis for Muslims alone. You know, that kind of thing is being taught in government school. In private schools it is less so. So people who are coming out of private schools, obviously their parents are rich and they know what is happening in government schools, so they would rather spend their children abroad. Similarly with the army schools too.
We'll come back to education a bit later. Let's go back to the roots of the Pakistan movement. So one person whose name comes up again and again is obviously Syed Ahmed Khan. What can you tell us about him? Like, what, I suppose, what his background was, and why did he end up playing such a role?
I haven't studied Syed Ahmed Khan in detail. I just picked up that you know, his views of representative government. That's what was of interest to me. What was his views of representative government? Though he is considered to be, you know, people consider him as, you know, founder of modern education among the Muslims and Aligarh Muslim University, but his views of representative government were that, you know, that time probably people didn't know what representative government was all about. You know, if you look at the 1880s and 1890s, they thought that if you have one man, one vote, all the Hindus will vote for a Hindu, all the Muslims will vote for Muslims, and because they are in a minority, Muslims will never be elected. So that was how, and some of the statements that I've quoted in his book are pretty alarming. If you see them, and if you have them, I don't have them here, but if you can read out some of them, they are pretty alarming what he said.
Yeah, he mentioned somewhere that this is not Syed Ahmed, I think this might be Jinnah. He's saying something along the lines of ki they want to fight karke, we also want to fight, but we want one with arms or something.
That was in 1946. That was Jinnah's statement when he ordered the direct action day. And he said, we have also a pistol. You know, that was the time when that was much later. That was Syed Ahmed was also, he said a couple of things which were pretty alarming, as I mentioned in my book. So here we are talking about my first book, Pakistan Quoting the Others.
Yeah. So the Brits, they supported Syed Ahmed Khan by funding the AMU, Aligarh Muslim University.
Initially, yes.
Initially.
Yes.
And what was their expectation? Did they expect that this will ensure that the empire like never ends karke, or?
It was safety of there. They wanted, as I mentioned, the Hunter Commission report, they found that because of the Muslims were not taking to the education, whereas the Hindus had, so therefore they could not compete in government jobs. Therefore they continued to have a sense of alienation and continue to feel not loyal to the Queen. So this is what the whole objective of Hunter Commission was. That what is it that we can do for the Muslims? So in 2 generations, they turned the Muslim community around through educational and reforms and other things. But it just so happened that Lord Mayo, who had set it up, was ultimately killed or assassinated in the Andamans. Lord Mayo, who was the viceroy, he was killed by an Islamic fanatic.
So somewhere in the book you cite M.J. Akbar, and he says that the Brits turned the Muslim population, which was hostile to them,
in 2 generations,
two generations into a loyal population. Somewhere else, I believe, not Jinnah, but some other Pakistani leader says that the Hindus are quite devious karke, and they have this blamed the 1857 uprising on us, when that was not the case in reality. So I suppose, what was their, mindset?
No, I'm not sure. I can't recollect this. About Hindu deviousness, this is a study which was carried out in the Command and Staff College by Lieutenant General Javed Hassan, when he studies 2000 years of Indian history and makes some conclusions. That he mentions this Hindu deviousness. But the other thing which you mentioned, I don't recollect having been mentioned.
So you brought this up, this study that was done 2000 years of Indian history.
Yeah.
And it's quite striking, the conclusions they come to. Could you like touch upon this?
Yeah. So shall I read them out? I've got them this because it's very interesting and fascinating. That shows the mindset of the Pakistan Army, at least, because there is compulsory reading in Pakistan Army. It's called India, a Study in Profile. So, and after studying 2000 years of India, the conclusions are: number 1, India has a poor track record at projection of power beyond its frontiers. 2, it has a hopeless record in protecting its own freedom and sovereignty despite having larger armies. 3rd, dismal performance of the military is matched by the near total absence of any popular resistance against foreign domination. 4th, the key traits of the Hindu are presumptuousness, persistence and deviousness. 5, India has been unable to exist as a single unified state. 6, this is important, India's northern and western states represent its Hindu core. Indian Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir and southern state of Tamil Nadu and the 6th northeastern tribal states are alienated from the Indian mainstream, and with some encouragement could become centers of insurgencies that could weaken India if not dismember it. And finally, the other states had regional impulses but inadequate momentum for secessionism. And finally, India is unviable. Pakistan only needs to give it a push, and this artificial Hindu state would implode. Now, this is the mindset of the Pakistan Army. Such a shallow understanding, with a priori assumptions, did lead to disaster, because in 1999, Javed Hassan was by that time a Lieutenant General, and he was force commander in other areas.
So he played a role in Kargil.
He, with the Musharraf, Muhammad Aziz and Mahmood Ahmad, conceived of a scheme like Kargil, which was based on the assumption that a Hindu has no stomach for a fight and the Hindu will cave in before superior force. So that is the kind of mindset that they have.
So, I mean, these are military men, right? So, they are professionals. I suppose, like, one would assume that when you're fighting a war against an enemy, you would try and see what the strengths of the enemy are to ensure that, you're able to overcome them. But in their part, it seems a lot of, what would I say, like historical amnesia. For example, they mentioned, Tamil Nadu is not, separate area. Are they like not aware, I believe, of Cholas and all such?
Ideological indoctrination is so much that one Muslim soldier is equivalent to 10 Hindu soldiers. This was the belief that they have. So in 1965 they got a big shock when they realized that they were not able to take Kashmir. In 71 it was even worse. As Ayub Khan wrote in his diary, that this is the first victory that the Hindus have had over Muslims for the last 800 years. You know, it is in their mindset that, and Ayub Khan at the height of the 65 war sent a military directive to General Musa, who was the commander-in-chief, and he said the Hindu has no stomach for a fight. And a couple of blows at the right time and place would demolish his morale. You know, so this is the kind of mindset if you have. So you're right, people should assess the strengths and weaknesses. But you know, they have this ideological upbringing that the Hindus weak and will cave in. And but they have always faced, you know, with the might of the Indian army when they face, they're suddenly struck by, you know, what happened even with Musharraf. When Nawaz Sharif asked Musharraf, you told me victory is assured and now how come you're not able to do anything and your soldiers are dying? So Musharraf says, I didn't realize, or we didn't realize that the Hindus will or India will react so strongly. So they had just presumed that the Hindus will cave in for superior force. So despite being professionals, as you mentioned, they have this ideological mindset and ideological baggage that they carry, which is based on 800 years of Islamic rule over India, especially of the Mughals. They feel they're inheritors of that legacy, and the Hindus will not be able to match their Josh and their Jazba.
I believe along with this diary entry of Ayub Khan, you mentioned a report from a local daily in Lahore, I believe. They write that we are crying tears of blood today. The Hindus have won after 1,000 years or something along those lines.
So, you know, in this mindset, it's always Hindu-Muslim. And this harks back to the fact that Pakistan has not been able to create an identity for itself except being anti-India. They have no basis, you know. We can talk about identity in greater detail later on, but this is the reason for it. They don't have any basis for nationalism in Pakistan except for being anti-India. So when India reacts, that's why when you had reaction like Uri or you had Balakot, Pakistan is stunned. They just don't know how to react, how to get back their Josh and Jazba and that feeling of superiority that they had. And now when they are, you know, economically they're doing so poorly, and India is going to become the third largest economy in the world, I mean, they are shattered.
This concept of, you know, their identity being rooted in anti-Indianness, or if I might say anti-Hinduness to be more precise. Some time ago I read a book by Professor John Mearsheimer. I can't remember two of his books. In one he mentions this concept of thin and thick cultures. So a thick culture would be like, let's say Japan, right? It's quite homogeneous. And a thin culture would be, let's say, a country like Pakistan. And he mentions there that thin cultures, to stay united, have to find a sort of external enemy to demonize, so that there is some sort of binding factor. So do you think that his assessment in general is right? And
yeah, you see, in the case of Pakistan, if you see, now the two wings of Pakistan that were created had never existed before as a single state. Even the truncated Pakistan after 1971 had never existed as a single state. There were different ethnicities, different language, different historical memories. And Pakistan's task was to weld them into a single homogeneous identity. They used religion, you know, that we are all Muslims and therefore. But Islam was strong enough to create a country by frenzy of communal passions. But it was not glue to keep these nationalities together because of their own separate ethnicities, language, history, which predated Islam. You see, like Wali Khan made this famous statement in the National Assembly. He said, I've been a Pashtun for 4,000 years, a Muslim for 1,400, and a Pakistani just for 50. So for him, his Pashtun identity was far more important than the other two identities. So this experiment of using Islam, you see, again a Pakistani professor, if I quote, he said, if the Arabs, the Iranians and the Turks give up Islam, the Arabs remain Arabs, the Iranians will remain Iranians, and the Turks will remain Turks. But what do we remain if we give up Islam?
Second-rate Indians.
Yeah, somebody said second-rate Indians. Yeah. So they could only cling together because of Islam, and that didn't work. In fact, Maulana Azad had told and warned Jinnah that you are demanding Pakistan in the name of religion, but nowhere in the Quran or in Islam is religion the binding force for creating a country. You know, the Qawm or the nation consists of all the people who are there. And the loyalty of the Indian Muslims is to the various sects, not to Islam per se. And that is exactly what happened. So, because they couldn't create this identity, therefore what else do they do? They're anti-India. You know, the saying, Hindustan ka jo yaar hai, gaddar hai. You know, building this thing about that India is out to undo partition, therefore stay together. But that is not enough a binding force. Bangladesh broke away because for them language was a far more salient part of their identity than religion. They're the fifth insurgency in Balochistan. The Sindhis are up in arms. The Pashtuns are pulling in a different direction. So, failure to create an identity, an overarching Pakistani identity, has been a critical factor in Pakistan's lack of development.
So, one of the reasons you mentioned why Islam isn't like Islam is strong enough to create Pakistan but isn't strong enough to keep it together is the fact that the Muslim community in what we now call Pakistan has never been a minority in that area, like demographically speaking. So, for them, the religious identity comes after their ethnic identity and linguistic identity.
Yes. You see, now for example, in the then NWFP, the Muslim League raised the slogan of Islam in danger. Now, 96% of the population there was Muslim. So the guys look at the Muslim League, were you mad? You know, if there are 4% Hindus and Sikhs and we are 96% and then you say Islam is in danger, it just didn't cut any ice. Similarly, in other parts of what is today Pakistan, this did not cut any ice. How can Islam be in danger?
If I were to like put myself in the, let's say, shoes of the Pakistani ruling class, is there any way to like come up with an identity that sort of grants some form of coherence to Pakistan other than religion? Because it seems to me that is the only thing they have.
But they've gone too far down the road. You see the kind of Islamization that has taken place since Zia's time, the kind of Islamizing of education. You will require a completely new generation and completely new textbooks and new school curriculum to start the process of reform. You know, it is gone too far down. You have got religious parties. They may not be politically strong in terms of number of MPs in parliament, but they are very strong in terms of street power, isn't it? So, they've gone too far down the road. I'll give you one example of Islamization I quote in my book. In district of Okada a couple of years ago, there was a congregation in a mosque and the Maulvi asked a question and a little boy, 14, 15-year-old, raised his hand by mistake. So the Maulvi in a section of the congregation said that you have committed blasphemy. So the boy was so overcome with grief that he went into a nearby field and chopped off his hand by using a forward cutting machine and presented that hand to the Maulvi, and his family and the Maulvi and all cheered. So the Nation, which is a leading daily in Pakistan, wrote editorially that if we can hurt ourselves to prove that we are good Muslims, imagine what can we do to others. You know, just see he's chopped off his hand. दूसरों को क्या करेगा? So this is the kind of Islamization that has gone into Pakistan. How do you pull back?
You mentioned like Zia, so let's talk about him a bit. How was he different from his predecessors, Zia? Because you mentioned him as, well, his predecessors used Islam, they were more opportunistic, I believe is the word you use. Whereas Zia was the true believer, like he actually believed in it.
So he did it out of conviction. He really felt that Pakistan could hold together only because of Islam. So this whole focus of zakat, focus on hudud ordinances, Islamic punishments, and infusing the army also, getting the Tablighi Jamaat. So he really believed, and it was after that Pakistan hasn't looked back. But for him also, it was a tactic to some extent, because he knew that he was a pariah in the world after he had hanged Bhutto, after his military coup. So he needed some sort of support, especially from the Middle Eastern countries. So he used this Islamization, and then, of course, much to his luck, the Soviet Union decided to invade Afghanistan in 1979, and he became a poster boy for the West.
So let's talk about the Pakistani army a bit. We are seeing a few months ago, a few weeks ago, there were all these protests in Pakistan in support of Imran Khan. Much of the rage was, I hope it's accurate to say, directed against the army in one way or the other. So we have seen a trend where Pakistan's army had a sort of mythical aura about it in Pakistan, and now that aura, it appears, is being lost. Do you think that's accurate? And
yeah, you see, this was what Major General Sher Ali Pataudi had told Yahya Khan, that the ability of the Pakistan army to rule is because the people perceive it to be a mythical entity, a magical force that would succor them in times of need when all else failed. The army was the ultimate guarantor of Pakistan's well-being and sovereignty. What Imran Khan did, because of his cult figure, we can talk about him later, that he damaged this magical force, mythical entity concept and the relationship that the Pakistan army had with the people. Therefore, the reaction of the army has been so severe and so strong, because they realized that their aura has been dented. Because, you know, those images of the Corps Commander's house being burned, people walking off with strawberries, people walking off with peacocks, or the gates of GHQ being knocked, martyrs' memorials being damaged.
There was something in Sardoga, I believe. Sargoda, where they attacked
the martyrs' memorial. So for the army, this is the army's heartland, Punjab, and in Lahore of all the places, you know, which is the heart of the heartland. So it severely damaged the Pakistan's army aura. And that is something which the army will not forgive Imran Khan. That's why they call it a black day, 9th of May. And they will not forgive him for a long time to come.
We'll touch upon the current issues a bit later. Can we talk about what led to this, myth amongst the Pakistani population that the army is better than the, let's say, the political class, which is selfish and all. You talk about this 1953, I believe, in Lahore, when the army took control during the anti-Ahmadiyya riots. So could we talk a bit more about that?
Even before that, when the Radcliffe line was drawn, it was drawn on the basis of population, not on the basis of defensive frontiers. So they found the population centers like Lahore and Sialkot very close to the Indian border. So the physical defense of Pakistan was problematic and was prioritized right from 1947 onwards. So whenever Pakistan, and especially the Pakistan army, thought in terms of security, they thought in terms of military security. Defense of Pakistan became important. So large sums of money were handed over to the army for defense of Pakistan. Even so, in the initial years, at least the civilians dominated the government. But bulk of the civilian leadership had come from India. Jinnah, Liaquat Ali, and more than half the cabinet had come from India. They did not know Pakistan. Whereas the Pakistani army was sons of the soil. Ayub Khan was from Hazara, in Pakistan. Muhammad Musa, the commander-in-chief, was there. Yahya Khan was again a Pathan. So till Zia in 77, 30 years after the creation of Pakistan, the first non-son of soil, that is Zia, he came from India, from Jalandhar, became the army chief. So the army was able to dominate because they were sons of soil, they knew the land. The politicians did not. And then during the Pakistan movement, the Muslim League did not build up a second-rung leadership. They did not have any political mobilization. As I mentioned in my book, Jinnah and the Muslim League got Pakistan on a platter. They didn't have to fight the British. The fight was between the Congress and the British. The struggle was between the Congress and the British. Everybody from Gandhiji to Nehru to all the Congress leaders spent years in jail. Nobody from the Muslim League went to jail for demanding Pakistan. So there was no political mobilization, there was no preparation, there was no second-rung leader. So when Jinnah died in 1948 and 51, Liaquat Ali was assassinated, there was nobody who could take charge, take control. And it made it easy for the army. Then of course that Lahore thing that you mentioned. So this is the reason why people looked up to the army. There was a whole lot of prime ministers who succeeded Liaquat and all sort of venal and corrupt, and they couldn't administer. Everybody was pulling everybody else down. Scathing criticism I mentioned in my book, Editorials of the Pakistan Time. So the army found it very easy to slip into power and remain there. So, and the people felt that the army is the one that can save us.
So this Lahore 1953 thing you talk about in the book, they widened, not just restored order in the city, they widened the roads, cleaned up the city and all that. So I suppose there was some element of competence associated with the army.
Yeah.
Is that still there, or has that like gone away completely?
It is still there. You see, now anything that needs to, when COVID happened, it was the army that associated with the civil administration to set up this national command center or something to deal with COVID. Anything major has to be done, the army is always on board. Now recently Pakistan has set up two things. The Special Investment Facilitation Center to invite single window to attract investment from the Gulf state. Army is part of that. They have set up the Land Management Center to harness about 22 million acres of land to grow additional crops to export to the Middle East and to China. The army is part of that. So any project that needs to be undertaken, anything that has to be done, it's the army. Whether it's elections, the army provides security. Census, again, the army is involved. So anything, CPEC authority was handled by an army officer. So that army continues to, people have faith that the army will deliver. So even now, even after the May 9th incident, though the army aura has been dented, within 2 months the army has clawed its way back into the imagination of the people that, you know, what Imran Khan tried to do, you know, we'll discuss that later, but the army has clawed back.
And you mentioned some book was written before Imran Khan, this whole thing happened.
Yeah.
But you mentioned in the book again, and I wanted to ask this, you mentioned the same thing, that the army always somehow manages to come back up again. So they temporarily suffer a reputation blow or something, but they, in the end, they always recover. Do you think this will like continue? Will they always be able to recover? Or
yes, because so long as the political class as a whole is not strong enough, doesn't strengthen democracy, does not strengthen the political parties, the army will always play one against the other. You see, the best opportunity was with Bhutto after the 71 war. He could have made sure that the army remained subservient to the civilians. But his hatred for India was so much, as much as the Pakistan army, he wanted to use the Pakistan army against India. So he missed that opportunity. After the Abbottabad incident when Osama bin Laden, the Prime Minister could have sacked the army chief and the DGISI, again taken charge and control of the army, but they didn't. So it's the politicians who have failed repeatedly in seeking to control the army, even when they had opportunities. Then, when a politician is out of power, they run to the army, you know, put us into power.
yeah, you mentioned that whenever someone is in the opposition, they visit the general's house.
They visit the general's house. Look at Imran Khan, he was selected, and he, from 2011 onwards, he was nurtured to come into power. The fact that he failed, that's a different thing, but again today, you know, it's the army that is pulling the strings and creating one party, making sure that politicians shift here and there. So unless and until the politicians get their act and treat Pakistan as a democracy, democracy means not only holding elections, but working with the opposition, making sure that they don't allow army to interfere. Don't run to the army every time there is a problem. So, you know, the army will continue to dominate.
I suppose from an Indian perspective, does it make any difference for us if, like, let's assume there is a day when the army is no longer in charge of Pakistan, the politicians are truly, does it still make any difference for us as Indians, or will their policy remain the same?
Policy will remain the same. You see, the policy of anti-India, as I mentioned, that is their identity. So it doesn't matter if it is A, B or C, or whether it is the army. You know, the policy will always be the same. We could feel that because it's a democracy, and democracy normally don't fight with each other, you know, we could, but in the case of Pakistan, it is not true. You know, it will be the same. I mean, look at Bilawal Bhutto. You consider him Western educated and all that. The kind of statements he has made against the Prime Minister. and the kind of things is that there can be no talks, no space left for talking to India because of the 5th August 2019. So, Shehbaz Sharif says the same thing. So whether it is any politician who is in power or whether it is the army. In fact, if it is the army, then it is far easier. You know this is what they believe, it's clear cut. Politicians will, try and beat around the bush and do this and pretend he's this and pretend he's that. Look at Benazir. When 1989, when this problem started in Kashmir, she was the one who went up to Neela Bhatt and screamed, Azadi, Azadi, and he said, Jagmohan, she said, Jag, Jag, Mo, Mo, Han, Han, as if chopping him into pieces. So they're all the same.
So it's so people often, I have seen this in the public discourse sometimes, they often tend to blame the army, and as if the army is not in control, everything will be, hunky-dory. But
no, it's not
the case.
It's not that at all.
Is Pakistan like a rational actor as a state? So if we take the realist foreign policy, it states that all states want power maximization because they feel insecure. So, but even if we assume that is true, Pakistan's actions don't seem rational, at least to me. Because why would you keep poking a state which is much bigger than you, much more economically powerful than you?
You see, let's put it this way. Pakistan is a normal state, except when it comes to India. With India, it is not a normal state because of the baggage of history, because of its anti-India identity, and one thing which I haven't touched upon, its obsession of parity with India. That whatever India is, we are the same, if not better. So they want parity in everything, especially military parity. So because of these factors, anti-Indianness, lack of identity and wanting parity, with India it is not a normal state. As you rightly said, you see if India is a bigger, in 1947, they sent in raiders in 47. If they were a weaker power, why would it that you send raiders into Kashmir? 65 you sent in infiltrators. This Operation Gibraltar. Kargil. This whole thing of that we are the inheritors of the Mughals and we have to be treated at par, if not better than India. So for these things, it distorts its perception in dealing with India. It's not a normal state when it comes to dealing with India. In fact, at times, we fall into this trap of treating Pakistan as a normal state, when it is anything but a normal state when it comes to dealing with India. They're perfectly normal dealing with other countries, but not with India.
You mentioned about this WEAP analysis, which stands for water, education, economy and population. So it appears that because of their obsession with India, they are focusing on the wrong issues, like paying too much attention to military security instead of other things internally that are structural challenges they are facing. So can we touch a bit upon these issues?
Yeah, it's what can one say? It's not that Pakistan doesn't have enough water. Let's start with water, but they have mismanaged water resources to the extent that it was a water surplus state in 1951, and despite the growth of population and expansion of agriculture, today it is in danger by studies carried out by Pakistani own think tanks, Pakistan Council for Research in Water Resources, that it will become, the water availability will fall below 500 cubic meters per capita, which is actually drought-like conditions in part of the country. The National Water Policy some years ago said that Pakistan must invest 10% of the development budget in upgrading water infrastructure, which should go up to 20% by 2030. Today, the investment in water resources is 1% of the development plan. So, one example, because they have not built enough storage dams, the entire water equivalent to the Chenab River, more than the Chenab River, actually is flowing into the sea because they can't store it. This has been calculated to mean a loss of about $30 billion a year, because they're not able to store this water and it flows. And this flows into the sea in the 4 monsoon or summer months. Rest of the year, the Indus does not reach the sea because it has been diverted and dammed, canals have been gone out. So there is sea intrusion, and sea is intruded about 100-150 kilometers into districts like Thatta and Badin, which has now become absolutely barren land because of seawater intrusion. 34% of the water only reaches the fields from the canals. 36, I think. 64% is lost in transmission. Canals are not lined. They don't choose drip irrigation. Free water is running. They are growing sugarcane, which consumes 6 times more water in the hottest and the most humid parts of Pakistan. So consumption of water grows up. So total mismanage of their water resources. As a result of which they are in a situation where they are today.
Is the ruling class, I suppose, aware of this problem, and are they?
Yeah, because
concerned
Pakistani
about
think tanks are writing about this constantly. You see now, for example, in this year's, in the last 2 years also, in the Kharif sowing season, which is from the Kharif season is April to November. Rice, cotton, sugarcane grow there. In the sowing phase, which is from April, May to 1st of June, there is a shortfall of between 28 to 35% water shortfall, which means you can't sow crops if you don't have enough water. The Tarbela and Mangla dams, the storage dams, have reduced water, so they can't make up for the loss of water. So people are aware of it because there are institutions like IRSA, Indus River Water, the agreement that they have with the province, they're writing about it, comes out in the newspapers. But the ruling classes drink bottled water. Army gets bottled water. So they're not conscious.
Personally.
Personally affected. And the rich landlords, they divert waters from canals. They cut canals, they get water to the field. So overall, there is this problem. Then the productivity of water, it's one of the lowest productivities in the world. As compared to the average, world average is about $8.6 per cubic meter of water. Pakistan's 1 cubic meter of water produces just 34 cents. So, there's such a huge disparity. Even compared to India, there's a huge disparity. And despite this, there is something called Total Renewable Water Resources, TRWR. So, you assess the stress, water stress in a country. How much water are you withdrawing from your renewable water resources? More than 25% is considered excessive. In the case of Pakistan, is withdrawing 74% of its renewable water resources. Groundwater is almost becoming barren. In Lahore and other places, they are now digging up to 800 to 1,000 feet.
Search for water.
To get water. So, there is a looming disaster up in front and nobody is paying attention. And people in Pakistan are aware of it. The think tanks are aware of it. And people are writing about it, but the political class or the army is not taking any attention.
Even in self-interest, shouldn't they act more urgently? Because, if people don't have water, if they are facing scarcity, as you mentioned in the book, it can lead to social chaos in the streets.
Because there is no life without water. There's a simple fact. There's no life without water. But it's not happening. You don't see any urgency. As I wrote in my book, Pakistan should have been in an emergency mode 10 years ago. Today it has to be in a disaster management mode. Nothing. The kind of investment in water resources, instead of increasing, it's being reduced because as it is, they don't have money. They don't have money for essential imports, for food, etc. So where are they going to invest now? Education is the other second factor that I mentioned and I talk about in detail. 50% of school children, school going age, don't attend primary schools. 50%.
50%. I remember I read that number and I was like, this can't be right. Like 50% of the people who are eligible to go to school are not going.
So they don't go to primary, they will not go to secondary, they will not go to, and how will they go to universities? When I wrote the book, only about 3.3% of the people had degrees, bachelor's and master's degrees. Just 3.3% of the school-going or college-going population. 61% of the labor force was either illiterate or poorly educated. So in today's globalized and technological world, how is Pakistan going to compete?
Yeah, and you mentioned that in the literacy figures,
58%.
58%, and like many of them are counting people who can just write their name. That's it, not anything more than that.
And then case of population. In 2017, when I was writing the book, the population was growing at 2.4%. Population was about 205 million. Another census which just finished in 2023, the population has gone up to 2.5, growing at 2.55%. And the population is already 241 million. It was thought that it will be 220 million but it is already 241 million. So you can imagine by 2050 where it will be.
And I suppose
33 million people have been more than in 2017.
I suppose the lack of education also plays a role into the high population growth, because we know that if women are educated, they tend to produce less children.
So Pakistan has this what is called a demographic dividend, the opportunity for a demographic dividend, because the working age population is more than the young and the old. So when a country faces this or has this situation, it's called a demographic dividend. India has the same age profile. We were able to capitalize on the youthful population, and you had economic reforms, economic development, and you're growing at 7%. Pakistan, because of the lack of education and lack of economic development, cannot cash in on this demographic dividend. So it's becoming a demographic hoard. It was estimated about 3 million people enter the labor force every year. 3 million. Pakistan's economy, if it grows at 5.5 or 6%, creates jobs for about 1 million people. So what happens to the 2 million people who cannot be absorbed in the labor force? They'll become cannon fodder for the jihadi organizations. You know, because they're poor, they're illiterate, poorly educated. What are they going to do? And this is going to happen for the next 30 years. Every year, 3 million people coming into the labor force and nothing for them to do.
Yeah. I believe in the education sector, you also mentioned that even the people who are getting educated, the kind of education they are receiving certainly should be a cause of concern for us here in India.
So as I mentioned, what is being taught in, I can just quote you from that book, The Subtle Subversion, where what is being taught in Pakistani schools. And it's, you know, this is a study by Pakistani think tanks themselves. Is it right? Madrasas are not the only institutions breeding hate, intolerance, a distorted worldview, etc. The educational material in government schools does much more than madrasas. The textbooks tell lies, create hatred, inculcate militancy, and much more. The curriculum encourages ideas that are incompatible with the ideas of Pakistan as a forward-looking modern state committed to equal rights and equitable treatment for its citizens. This is what is taught in government schools, where 65 to 70% of the school children attend. So, you know, when a child goes through government schools and comes out, he's imbued with hatred. You know, hatred against others, hatred against Hindus, Jews, Christians. Shahadat for him is, you know, rather than living, he is taught the value of dying. You know, so the real improvement in Pakistan will come only when the education curriculum is changed.
And as of now, it hasn't been, right?
So when Imran Khan came, he started the single national curriculum. Now the key, curriculum is a problem. The bigger problem is that Pakistan needs 50,000 more schools. It needs 100,000 more teachers, so that children who are out of school and the dropouts, they can be brought into the school fold. He focused on single national curriculum, which is that the government schools, they must all have studied and know and be able to repeat Quran verbatim. So
that is
whatever little was left in the government schools, Imran Khan with the single national curriculum has ruined that. In fact, there is a very interesting statement by Parvez Hoodboy. He mentions the greatest threat to Pakistan may be in its abysmal education system. Pakistani schools, not just madrasas, are churning out fiery zealots fueled with a passion for jihad and martyrdom. So this is taught, you know, so you can imagine the danger Pakistan poses to itself and to other countries in the region.
Yeah. We don't foresee this changing anytime soon, do we?
At least for the last when I wrote this book in 2016 till 23, 7 years now, it's become worse rather than becoming any better.
Is there like anything we can do to influence how they, like, I suppose, is there anything India can do other than remain vigilant? Does it have any leverage?
No. In fact, first of all, as soon as something comes from India, it'll be disregarded. Surprisingly, my book was not, because people felt that I had written in a very honest and a fair manner, and one noted Pakistani commentator He said this is easily the best book on Pakistan. Because it was written with a sense of fairness and quoting Pakistani sources and without any chest thumping or anything like that. So, but whether that book has been, the lessons from this book are being implemented or people taking notice of it, I don't see any signs of it. Now there was one particular brief moment, you know, when Imran Khan became Prime Minister and the first speech that he gave on television, he talked about malnutrition.
Okay.
And he put out 2 photographs of the brain map of a child who was suffering from malnutrition and a normal healthy child. And I said, my God, this guy has read my book. You know, because this is one of the things that I talk about, malnutrition. And I said, now Pakistan has an opportunity that maybe they will come out of the, you know, on the brink, as it were. But that was just a hogwash. He didn't do anything thereafter. So even when they've had opportunities and they could do things, nobody is paying attention to this.
You mentioned in the book, I believe, that they received some kind of aid from the US for this education problem, and you mentioned that 50% of that was used in, you know, building new offices for the Babus.
So you know, the budget, as per the world standards, 4% of your budget should be spent on education. Pakistan is spending less than 1.5 to 2. Even that limited expenditure, 89% goes on administrative costs, salaries, building repairs, 89%. Of the balance, 11%, a lot of it remains unused. So how is the education system going to improve?
Yeah. We talked about Imran Khan. So let's touch upon him. How do you see this whole situation on the Imran Khan that is unfolding and the current chaos in Pakistan? You know, they dissolved the National Assembly recently and installed a new caretaker Prime Minister. How do you look at this whole situation?
See, the first issue is, because the assembly was dissolved 3 days before its term was to complete, so elections have to be held in 90 days. But in between, there is also constitutional provision that elections should be held on the basis of the latest census. So they have improved, the Council of Common Interest approved the latest census. So this constitutionally, the Election Commission of Pakistan has to delimit constituencies. And the delimitation of constituencies takes up a period of 4 months. Right? So obviously the 3-month period which is given also as per the constitution, elections have to be held, will not be held. So there is confusion and chaos that when will the elections be held, which constitutional provision should be given primacy, of delimitation or holding elections within 90 days, because the caretaker government's mandate is also for 90 days. So there is a bit of a constitutional thing, and people seem to think that delimitation is far more important than this 90 days limit. So that is one aspect, that when will the elections actually be held. The second issue is, will Imran Khan be allowed to contest? Will the PTI be allowed to contest, or it is totally decimated? He's already in jail, and because of that he is being debarred from politics for 5 years. Now he has appealed, he's going to go into appeal. So far, with the Chief Justice has been standing in his corner and has given him relief out of the way. So they could well overturn this, they could well quash it, but the Chief Justice retires in the middle of September.
Okay.
So what happens to the new Chief Justice? How will the judiciary react to this? So that is the second question. Will Imran Khan be allowed to contest elections? And what is the status of the PTI? I personally feel that the army will not allow Imran Khan to come back. He has about 120 other cases against him, FIRs. And this was one case on the Tosha Khana. There is the Al Qadir Trust, there is the foreign funding case, there is a question of treason of his involvement in the May 9th attack on the army installation. So in some way or the other he is going to be disqualified, not allowed to contest. This is what I personally feel, but we'll have to wait on, watch on that. Inflation is at an all-time high. How does the PMLN and the PPP, what do they go to the people with? The fourth interesting factor is that the youth, young people, are 44% of the electorate, over 55 million. In the last elections in 2018, there were over 110 constituencies where the margin of victory was between 1,000 and 2,000 votes.
Okay.
And there were another 51 seats where the margin of victory was less than 6,000 votes. Now, if this youth cohort were to actually go out to the ballot and vote on that day, it could be a game changer. They don't know how they will vote. So if the election is not rigged, and the youth actually, and Imran Khan is a youth icon, so that's another variable in the whole situation. That how will the youth vote? 44% is a huge chunk, 55 million people, and with the margin of victory is so narrow. Last time, because it's a triangular contest, PPP, PMN and PTI, margins were very, very narrow. This time, what happens? So that's another thing to think about. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Then this IMF program is only for 90 days because they felt that it should spread over the current government, the caretaker government and the new government, and then the new government will go in for an extended fund facility, a longer term program. How does that work out? Will this caretaker government be able to implement the reforms that were agreed to by this outgoing government? That's another thing to be watched. Then you have the security situation. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is on the rampage. So is the Islamic State Khorasan province, the Daesh. The recent attack in Bajor, 55 people were killed, a political party. The TTP attacked the brigade headquarters in Zob. So the huge uptick in violence. How will the caretaker government deal with it? Relations with Afghanistan are not good. They're issuing statements against each other. So between now and as and when the elections are held, or even thereafter, there's a lot of uncertainty in Pakistan.
So regarding Imran Khan, we obviously see a lot of supporters coming out in Pakistan on social media and all that. How much popularity does he have in Pakistan? Do we have a sense of that? Like how popular he is in Pakistan, Imran Khan?
You see, it's very difficult to say because what Pakistan has, what Imran Khan has done, his social media team is fantastic. They create a trend and then trolls amplify that trend. So if you look at Twitter, or if you look at Facebook, you think that he's the most popular, he's the messiah, he's this, he's that. Is it actually so? Or these are just armchair people, each guy has about 10 fake accounts and people are tweeting and creating this kind of a trend and this kind of a hype. So a lot of people feel that this is all a created hype. It's not, but yes, he continues to be popular. The rallies that he held, he had support in the retired army officers with the veterans, their families, some people say even in the army itself, serving officers. But I think the real test of his popularity ultimately in a democracy comes from elections. You can bring 100,000 people onto the streets. What does that prove? Unless and until you have votes, unless and until you can demonstrate, translate that popularity into power, what do you prove?
So with regard to Imran Khan, you mentioned it earlier briefly. It seems like he was a creation of the Pakistani army, like they created a Frankenstein monster, and now he has they have lost control of him. What exactly went wrong? Like why did he change his views on army so suddenly?
You see, because I think the army is to some extent to blame. They created him into a cult figure. You see, right from 2011, the propaganda was all the other politicians are corrupt. He is the man in shining armor. He is honest. He was the one who will deliver Pakistan. He is the messiah. There's Riyasat-e-Madina and Naya Pakistan, and he is the guy. So he built up a cult following. He started believing in that, hubris, that I am the guy, I am. So he thought he became bigger than the army. Then the army found after 2 years that we had put this guy in place so that he could govern, he could improve the economy, take care of that, and we look after the security issues, we look after foreign policy, we look after defense and things like that. He was not able to deliver. He ran the economy to the ground. If you recall his famous statement when he first took over, कि आपने घबराना नहीं है. Within 2 years, people started saying, अब तो हमें घबराने दो. Then the worst mistake that he did was, he started interfering in army postings and transfers. When the DG ISI was to be posted as corps commander, because to be in contention for the army chief's post, he should have served 1 year as corps commander. And the army chief was posting him out, and Imran Khan refused to let him go because he was his favorite. Now the army has favorite politicians. The army can't allow politicians to have favorite generals. So this is the mistake. Then the army said, Bhai, he's messing around with us. Our chain of command is going to get hit, so we can't allow this. So that's when they started falling out. And then the army realized we have to pull the plug. This man is far too dangerous for us, because if he meddles in the army chain of command, then all is lost. That's how he fell out.
Now this new caretaker prime minister that has come in, Senator Anwar, is that right?
Anwarul Haq Kakar.
Yeah. What do we know about him?
First of all, he's a Pashtun, though he's supposed from Balochistan. North Balochistan is all Pashtun areas.
Okay.
So he's a Pashtun. Kakar tribe, he's from the Kakar tribe. He seems to be well educated, knows a lot of languages, but he's a lightweight. He was the first time senator and supposed to be close to the establishment. He'll have to grow into his job, and will listen to what the army wants. This is what they ultimately wanted.
I saw just this morning, there's a report in Dawn, someone tweeted it. This views he had back in 2020, he's talking about forced conversion of Hindu girls. He said, these are not forced conversions at all, we can't look at it this way. So, this issue of treatment of minorities in Pakistan, do you see that it will keep continuing the way it is?
This is especially so in Sindh, where Hindus are concerned, Punjab where Christians are concerned, and to an extent in Frontier where there are Sikhs over there. This will continue. You see, it's unfortunate. I mean, for a Muslim in Pakistan to be anti-minority is in consonance with the idea of Pakistan. You build on the two-nation theory that Hindus and Muslims can't live together. So his anti-minority is in consonance with the idea of Pakistan. He feels he's doing nothing wrong. And then they are helpless. Nobody is supporting them. Nobody is helping them. They don't have a constituency. They have hardly any voice in the corridors of power. So they are totally at the mercy of these predators, who pick up young, unmarried, minor, Hindu girls. And because how is it that no Hindu boy is forcibly converted? And how is it that no Muslim girl converts to Hinduism either? So it's been documented. There are about more than 1,000 conversions, forced conversions per year. And sometimes even married women are picked up and forcibly converted, married women with children. And they are threatened that if you say that you are forcibly converted, we'll kill your brothers and your father. So, bichari ladki 13-14 saal ki, what is she going to do? It's really a pitiable condition, and shocking that the world doesn't take notice, the world doesn't talk about it to the extent that it should.
Regarding this treatment of minorities, can we touch briefly upon what the Pakistan army did in Bangladesh, the genocide they committed? And I suppose you talked about, the world doesn't react strongly. So even in India, there is not a lot of awareness about what happened in Bangladesh during those years.
There is. At that time, I think a lot of noise was made, and the fact that 3 million Bangladeshis were killed and over 200,000 were raped forcibly, the kind of atrocities carried out has been very well documented. In fact, the first person who blew the lid was a Pakistani journalist called Mascarenhas. He was the one who went there and he wrote articles that were published in UK. And thereafter, a series of reporting was done in India. But yes, it's been 50 years now.
I'm just talking about my generation. I never learnt about these things in my school. There's very little.
So that is, memories are short. People forget. But and to the credit of Sheikh Hasina, she's made sure that those people were put through trial. A lot of people have been hanged. People who were responsible. And all these years they had been got away scot-free. But and Pakistan still hasn't apologized for all the atrocities that they carried out. A lot of films, a lot of books have been written on this.
You talked about apology. Far from an apology, they seem quite, I might say, proud about what they did there. We showed the Hindus their place.
Yeah, and they say that this never happened. In Pakistan, the way they write history, there is no mention of Operation Gibraltar or sending in infiltrators in 1965. That everything began when India attacked them on 6th of September. It starts from there. Similarly, in Dhaka, humne to kuch kiya nahi. It was the Hindus who, at the instigation of India, rose up in revolt. So selective memory
Yeah.
and to wash away their sins. Similarly in Balochistan, what is the Pakistan army doing in Balochistan?
Yeah.
You know, this kill and dump, killing people, throwing their bodies away, what they have done in Sindh. So, total selective amnesia.
On Pakistan's part, there seems to be a lot of projection. You talked about their foreign minister and the kind of statements he has made, even Imran Khan equating the current government with Nazis and whatnot. They are a nation which committed a genocide. We look at the way they are treating minorities. Do they actually realize what they are doing, or do they genuinely drink their own Kool-Aid?
Yeah, it is a rote. They know it by rote. Massacre of Muslims in India. Genocide of Muslims in India. The other day I was reading the Pew report, which said that 96% of Muslims in India said they were free to practice their religion. 90% said they were proud to be Indians. Where is this genocide? Where is this thing which is coming from? They don't read, but because they want to score points back home, that who can be more anti-India than the other. So they keep talking. You look at Kashmir, you look at people of Kashmir who are interviewed in various TV channels. And when this G20 meeting was held over there, you're talking about two different places. What is emanating from Pakistan, the kind of nonsense which is being spewed out, and what is the situation on the ground? You think they're living in a parallel universe or what? But because they have been programmed to say this every, there are several anniversaries in Kashmir, they are programmed to say this, they will say it. Totally out of touch with reality.
Now, saw in the news recently, there was some talk about normalizing relations with India, and they were saying India has to come to us. Do you think, first of all, are they being genuine, and secondly, should India try to normalize relations with that country? Because there's no point, it seems to me.
Why? So, they are the ones after 5th August 2019 who withdrew the high commissioners, who stopped trade, who stopped all this. It's no water off our backs. We are not suffering. Our exports have done even much better without Pakistan. Pakistan is the one that is suffering. They have to get Indian stuff from Dubai. The entire pharmaceuticals are in Pakistan are from India. If India were to stop, and if they were stopped to import from Dubai, people will literally be dying on the streets. So it makes no difference to us. We are not standing at Wagah border. Ki bhi aa jao, humse baat kar lo. They don't want to talk. It's fine by us.
Long term, what do you think India's policy should be like, looking ahead at the future regarding Pakistan? Should it just be like we focus on our own economy, or I suppose there is a lot of talk about from the Western press, that India and Pakistan should normalize their relations, there should be peace. Is there what should India's policy be in the long term, just to develop our own capabilities or something more than that?
I think we have to keep our security grid. We have to be watchful. We have to be watchful about possibility of implosion in Pakistan, of different water, as I mentioned, the ethnic fault lines which are there, security fault lines with them. We need to monitor that situation to make sure that there is no repercussions on India as far as it is concerned. As far as talking and all is concerned, I mean, we talked even before 2019, we were talking for 65 years.
Yeah.
दूध की नदियाँ तो नहीं बह रही थी ना. It was the same thing. So long as Pakistan does not change its mindset, so long as the Pakistan's DNA is not anti-India, I think it's difficult to live even as good neighbors, let alone positive. So our focus has to be on management of relations. That is, situation should not deteriorate. If there is another terrorist attack, or we should not let the situation deteriorate. So management of relations, I think, is going to be, at least in the short and medium term, the way forward. And let's see where better sense prevails to Pakistan, because not talking to Pakistan makes no difference to us. It makes a difference to them. One thing that Pakistanis hate the most is being ignored by India.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to ignore them.
Yeah. So is there, because they have a strong relation with China, how do you see that playing out? Because we are in a geographically a bit of a iffy situation here with two such neighbors. How do you see that playing out, and is there any role India can play to make sure they don't get together too much?
No, I think the real cause of Pakistan and China coming together was to focus on India, because funding Pakistan, giving them military equipment was a easy option for China to keep India under check for the past 15-20 years, low cost option for China. But I think India has broken that shackles, we are no longer constrained as far as Pakistan is concerned. And China itself is getting increasingly frustrated with Pakistan. The growth of terrorism, the growth of Chinese being targeted, the CPEC not developing, it has plateaued. What Chinese wanted to invest and what Chinese wanted for the Pakistanis to deliver, that has not been happening. The power plants have been constructed, but the electricity is too expensive to be put into the grid. So therefore, the Pakistan government has a circular debt. So they are subsidizing because the electricity is so expensive. It was built at a very high cost. So China is frustrated. Therefore, the 10th anniversary of CPEC, not a very senior level officer or politician, there is only a vice chairman, he came. A vice chairman, vice premier or something like that. Not a very high level, it was the 10th anniversary, they should have. So China, there is increasing frustration with Pakistan. They may not show it, they will not admit it because the CPEC is a flagship program of BRI. BRI itself is struggling. And CPEC is certainly struggling.
Last question. Do you feel in India there is a proper awareness about what kind of a country Pakistan is? Or is it, is there a proper understanding in India at the level of the general population about Pakistan, or do you feel that is lacking?
I mean, it is certainly there in understanding in, policy circles and governmental among think tanks and all. But where the general population is concerned, as I always say, there are 1 billion Pakistan experts in India. Everybody has a point of view. But everybody has a point of view on Indo-Pak relations, now what is to be done with Pakistan. So when I started writing, my focus was on trying to understand Pakistan. Then why does Pakistan behave like that? Why is it such a troublesome state? Why is it frequently in danger of becoming a failed state? Why is it a terrorist hub? Are its problems of today or of since its creation, even before its creation? So that kind of understanding of Pakistan and the situation in Pakistan, I think there are not so many people in India who are studying this, because this is not a very fashionable and not a very, for lack of a better word, a sexy issue to look at, The nuclear issue with Indo-Pak relations, there are far more. Water and people, when I wrote, for example, water and education or population, people think, what is this? It's a boring subject. But for me, I think to understand Pakistan, where it's going, what is its future, is Pakistan going to run out of food? Despite having the world's largest irrigation network. Today they are importing 3 million tons of wheat. Why is that happening? So that kind of understanding, I think, amongst the populace at large is certainly not there. But among the policy circles, think tanks and government and all, certainly there is awareness.
At the general populace level also, I get a feeling that there is a sentiment, a strain of thought that, we are getting big now, we need to focus on China. But just personally, it seems to me it might be a bit dangerous to take our eyes off the ball in Pakistan.
Yeah, I agree with that. You can't let your eyes off the ball as Pakistan is concerned, because it could surprise you anytime. It could surprise you. So therefore, I think India is big enough and now strong enough to be able to keep eyes on both, Pakistan as well as China. So you can't divert attention from either.
I'll end with quoting a Pakistani writer you mentioned here. I'm afraid I can't remember who it was. And this person talks about, I grew up at a time when India and Pakistan were hyphenated in social and political discourse. Remember Indo-Pak. I argued with my Indian friends over the superiority of our cricket team, our national icons, even our GDP. These days, analysts find Af-Pak and its geostrategic resonance is more useful. The rivalry of my Indian friends first gave way to pity and now articulates itself as sympathy. I suppose that's comforting. So there is a sense in Pakistan that they've missed the bus, so to say, and India has gone far ahead.
Yeah, even if you watch the YouTube, if you watch the so-called podcasters and vloggers as they're called in Pakistan, there is an increasing, growing sense that we have missed the bus. We need to emulate what India is doing, focus on education, the great admiration for Chandrayaan, for example, the way that India is going to become the third largest economy in the world, and how dedicated Indian leadership is as compared to the Pakistan leadership, which is just interested in making money. And they are stunned by the fact that no Indian politician has got mansions in London or the UK, whereas every politician in Pakistan has a summer home or something over there. In fact, the joke was some years ago that cabinet meetings could be held in London because everybody was over there. So they are stunned by that, the simplicity and the dedication of Indian leadership as compared to that. In fact, there is one YouTube person, I was stunned, I was amazed that the way he has described the achievements of the current government, I haven't heard any Indian, even the political party in power, describe the achievements of the present Indian government the way this Pakistani did. In a sense of admiration, that please open your eyes, Pakistanis, this is what you need to emulate, this is what you need to do. And whole lot of other, there are some YouTubers who were saying, "Bhai, 2 generations ago, I was an Indian, I came from UP, I was this, I was that," and so that sense of desperation, sense that having missed the bus is becoming increasingly more so in Pakistan today.
I believe during the recent chaos that was going on, there was some YouTube video that was going viral. Some Pakistani chap was saying, "Hame Modi ji de do karke, unhe yahan bhej do." So, yeah. Anyway, Devasher, thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much.
We have by no means exhausted the contents of the book, and I'd urge viewers to read it.
And that's only the first book. There are 3 more.
There are 3 more books. I'm afraid I have just only read one of it.
Okay. But pleasure. Thank you so much for calling me.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best. Jai Hind.